Somewhere inside a conservation lab in London, a person in white gloves is washing a piece of fabric that is older than your country. It is silk. It was woven over 500 years ago. It has survived fire, war, flood, and 4 centuries of storage. And if this person makes one wrong move, it will not survive the next 10 minutes. So what do they reach for? Not a modern detergent. Not anything from a lab. They reach for a weed. The exact same plant that grows in the cracks of your sidewalk, the one your neighbor rips out of their flower bed every spring and throws in the trash, is the only thing on earth trusted to clean the most priceless fabric in human history. That should stop you. Because if the most advanced textile scientists on the planet, with access to every synthetic chemical ever invented, still reach for a roadside weed when the stakes are highest, then somebody, somewhere, made a very strange decision 100 years ago. They decided that this plant, the thing that had cleaned human beings and human clothing for over 4,000 years, was obsolete. And they convinced billions of people to agree with them. This is the story of that plant, how it built the very idea of what shampoo is, how an entire industry buried it on purpose, and why, quietly, in the one place where perfection actually matters, it never really left. Stick with me, because the ending of this story is not about a plant. It is about you, and what you are still being sold today. And if stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe now, because we dig up a piece of forgotten history like this every single week, and you do not want to miss the next one. Let's start with the plant itself, because once you understand what it actually is, everything else in this story starts to make sense. It is called soapwort. Its botanical name is Saponaria officinalis, and if that first word looks familiar, it should, because it comes straight from the Latin word for soap. Nobody invented a clever brand name for this plant. They just called it what it did. Crush the leaves, boil the roots, add water, and agitate it, and you get a soft, foaming, slightly slippery liquid that lifts oil and dirt off of nearly any surface you put it on: skin, hair, wool, silk, cotton, wood, even stone. It looks unremarkable. Pale pink and white flowers, thin stems, the kind of plant you would walk past 1,000 times without a second glance. And that is exactly what most people do, walk past it, because almost nobody alive today knows what it is capable of. But for most of recorded human history, this plant was not background scenery. It was infrastructure. To understand why, you have to go back to the actual beginning of humanity's obsession with getting clean, and that beginning is older than almost anything else we consider modern. Around 2800 BC, in ancient Babylon, someone pressed a formula into a wet clay tablet. It described how to combine animal fat with wood ash and water to create a cleansing substance. That tablet is the oldest surviving written reference to anything resembling soap, and it tells you something that is easy to forget in a world of 12-step skincare routines. Humans have always needed to get clean, and for almost the entirety of our existence, we solved that problem with whatever the earth handed us. Fat, ash, and plants. Lots of plants. Because scattered across the ancient world, from the Nile Delta to the hills of Mesopotamia, people kept independently discovering the same trick. Certain plants, when their roots or leaves were crushed and mixed with water, produced a lather. Not a chemical lather, a natural one. And they figured out fast that this lather could clean hair, skin, and fabric without destroying any of it. In Egypt, this discovery became part of daily ritual. Egyptians used soapwort-type plants to wash their hair, blending the resulting lather with animal fats for conditioning and citrus for extra cleansing power. This was not casual. Grooming in ancient Egypt was tied directly to status, religion, and identity, and the plants chosen for it were not chosen by accident. On the other side of the ancient world, in the Indus Valley, a completely separate civilization arrived at nearly the same conclusion without ever comparing notes. Archaeological evidence from sites like Banawali, dating back to roughly 2500 BC, shows people washing with a sapin-enriched plant mixture combined with shikakai, a plant whose name literally translates to fruit for hair, and amla, the Indian gooseberry, prized for strengthening the scalp. This 3-plant formula was cleaning human hair effectively for thousands of years before anyone on the planet had synthesized a surfactant in a lab. And here is a detail that should genuinely surprise you. The word shampoo itself comes from this exact tradition. It descends from the Sanskrit word shampoo, meaning to knead or massage, and it entered the English language in 1762 through Hindi. Every single time you say the word shampoo, you are quoting an ancient Indian head massage ritual built entirely around plant-based cleansers. The bottle in your shower did not invent the concept. It borrowed the name from something 4,000 years older than itself. So why did these completely unrelated civilizations, separated by oceans and centuries, all land on the same answer? Because the plants they were using all share the same secret ingredient, a group of natural compounds called saponins. And once you understand saponins, you understand why this story is so strange. A saponin molecule has two ends. One end is hydrophilic, meaning it is attracted to water. The other end is hydrophobic, meaning it is attracted to oil and grease. When you agitate saponins in water, those two-sided molecules wedge themselves directly between the water and the grease sitting on your skin, your hair, or your fabric. They pry the grease loose and suspend it in the water so it rinses cleanly away. Read that description again, because it is, molecule for molecule, exactly how a modern shampoo works. The chemistry inside the bottle on your bathroom shelf right now is not new. It is a copy. Nature figured out amphiphilic cleansing compounds millions of years before a single human chemist existed, and Soapwort was simply one of the best natural delivery systems for it. The Romans did not understand any of this on a molecular level, obviously, but they understood results, and results were enough. They cultivated soapwort deliberately in their gardens and used the foaming liquid it produced to wash their bodies and their hair. Roman bathhouses were massive social institutions, and soapwort was quietly part of that culture long before the word hygiene existed as a concept. They also noticed it worked as a water softener, which tells you they were paying real attention, not just following tradition blindly. Roman women reportedly prepared their hair with plant-based washes before religious festivals, using something gentle enough that hair could be cleaned and then immediately styled and decorated without damage. That word, gentle, is going to come back later in this story, and when it does, pay very close attention, because it explains almost everything that happens next. Because while soapwort was cleaning bodies, it was also quietly running one of the largest industries in the ancient and medieval world, textiles. The Greek physician Dioscorides, writing in the 1st century AD, documented a plant used by fullers, the textile workers responsible for turning raw, freshly woven wool into usable fabric. Their job involved a stage called scouring, cleaning the wool of dirt, lanolin, and natural grease before the fibers could be compressed and finished. This was the single most delicate step in the entire process. Use something too harsh, and the fibers turn brittle. The dye fades. The whole weave falls apart. Soapwort solved this completely. Fullers would gather the roots when the plant was in flower, soak them to extract the mucilage-rich liquid, then submerge the wool and work it by hand or by foot for hours, a process known in different regions as walking or walking. Their other options were far less appealing. Stale urine worked as a degreaser, but smelled exactly as bad as you would imagine. Fuller's earth, a type of absorbent clay, worked, but only partially. Soapwort was the civilized choice, effective enough to do the job and mild enough not to ruin the material. In fact, the French name for the plant, herb of foulon, translates directly to fuller's herb. In multiple languages, across multiple centuries, the plant's own name was simply a job description. And this was not a minor cottage craft. The medieval European wool trade was one of the largest industries on the continent, and English wool specifically was treated as a strategic economic asset. A wild plant growing in ditches and along roadsides was, quietly, critical infrastructure for one of the biggest industries in the world. By the Middle Ages, soapwort had moved out of the ditches and into the monasteries. Franciscan and Dominican monks cultivated it deliberately, treating it almost as a divine gift for cleanliness. Monastery gardens functioned as the pharmacies and hardware stores of medieval Europe, and soapwort earned a permanent spot next to the food crops and medicinal herbs because it was genuinely essential to daily operations. 13th century Italian monks used soapwort solution as a disinfectant. In the Swiss Alps, farmers washed sheep with it before shearing to soften the fleece. In Denmark, the plant still grows wild today around the ruins of old monastery gardens, a living fingerprint of monks who have been dead for centuries. Textile workers in ancient Syria relied on the same plant for the same purpose the European fullers did. Wherever there was a need to clean something delicate, Soapwort had already shown up, and that mildness kept opening new doors. By the Tudor period in England, wealthy fashion had shifted toward elaborate lace and delicate ruffled collars, fabrics that could not survive the harsher lye-based soaps that were becoming common for everyday laundry. Soapwort was the only option gentle enough to clean these fabrics without destroying them, and it left a subtle natural luster on the cloth as a bonus. At the time, this probably felt like a small, practical decision. It was not. That exact same property, extreme gentleness on delicate fibers, is the reason this plant is still doing a job today that almost nobody knows exists. We will get there. By the late 1500s, Soapwort had been thoroughly documented. The herbalist John Gerard wrote about it extensively in his Herbal published in 1597, recommending it as a topical disinfectant and cleaning agent, while also warning that once the plant established itself in a garden, it was nearly impossible to remove. Nicholas Culpeper, the famous 17th-century herbalist, echoed many of Gerard's observations decades later, although modern understanding suggests he overstated some of its supposed medicinal powers. By this point, Soapwort had accumulated an enormous list of folk nicknames across Europe, and each one is a small clue about how deeply the plant was woven into daily life. Latherwort, for the foam. Fuller's herb, for the textile trade. Crow soap. Dog cloves. Hedge pink. Farewell summer. Sweet Betty. Soaproot by the roadside. Few plants in European history accumulated more folk names, and few plants earned them more honestly. But the most memorable nickname of all was Bouncing Bet. There are two competing stories behind it. The most common explanation is that Bet was an Old English name associated with washerwomen, and bouncing described the rhythmic, energetic scrubbing motion of a woman working laundry against a washboard, arms pumping while Soapwort lather did the actual cleaning. The second story claims Bet was 18th-century slang for a barmaid, and that barmaids would rinse pint glasses at closing time with water and a sprig of Soapwort. Either version tells you the same underlying truth. This plant was so embedded in ordinary working life that the people who used it most became permanently attached to its identity. If you are enjoying this kind of deep dive into things hiding in plain sight, subscribe now, because this channel exists to dig up exactly this kind of forgotten history every week, and we are only about halfway through this one. By the 1800s, Soapwort had crossed the Atlantic. Puritan settlers brought it to North America, and once it took root, it spread across the eastern United States and into southern Canada with the exact aggressive persistence John Gerard had warned about 2 centuries earlier. It colonized roadsides, railway embankments, and abandoned fields without asking anyone's permission. For early American settlers, before commercial soap production became widespread, a trip to the garden for Soapwort leaves was simply how you got clean. Boil the leaves and roots, strain the liquid, wash yourself, your clothes, your dishes. Free, effective, and endlessly renewable. This plant had already outlasted the fall of Rome, the collapse of the medieval wool trade, the rise and fall of entire empires, and an ocean crossing. It had been a default cleaning agent across Western civilization for well over 2,000 years, and nobody had ever seriously needed an alternative. Then, in roughly 50 years, it disappeared from everyday life almost entirely. Not because it stopped working, not because something objectively better replaced it. It disappeared because the economics of getting clean changed, and a wild plant cannot compete with a factory. That shift starts in Germany. In 1903, a chemist and entrepreneur named Hans Schwarzkopf developed one of the first commercially sold hair washing products, a powder customers dissolved in water and applied directly to the scalp. For a few pennies a packet, you could buy convenience for the first time in human history. Before Schwarzkopf, buying a dedicated hair washing product barely existed as an idea. People used Castile soap, egg yolks, herbal infusions, vinegar rinses, or, still very commonly, Soapwort. Schwarzkopf died in 1921, but his wife Martha took over the company, and in 1927, under her leadership, the firm launched one of the first liquid shampoos sold in Europe. Now washing your hair required zero preparation. No boiling roots. No straining liquid. No growing anything. You just opened a bottle. But here is the detail almost nobody mentions. That early liquid shampoo was still soap-based, which meant, chemically, it was still doing the exact same job plants like Soapwort had always done. It was just packaged more conveniently. The real break from nature came 7 years later, and it is worse than you would expect. Soap-based shampoos had one persistent, genuinely annoying flaw. Soap reacts with minerals and hard water, leaving a chalky, stiff film on hair that dulls it and makes it hard to manage. People had dealt with this for generations by rinsing with vinegar afterward, but it was a hassle, and the industry knew a fix would sell. In 1934, Procter & Gamble launched a product called Dreen, the first shampoo made entirely from synthetic surfactants, with no soap in it whatsoever. Its key ingredient was an early version of what we now call sodium lauryl sulfate, a lab-engineered molecule built to do exactly what a saponin molecule already did: grip grease on one end, water on the other, without the hard water residue problem. It rinsed cleanly. It could be manufactured in enormous volume at extremely low cost. And that is genuinely the whole story here. The shampoo industry took a molecule that plants had been producing for free for hundreds of millions of years and replaced it with a laboratory-built copy that solved one narrow inconvenience while being marketed as an entirely new era of cleanliness. At a molecular level, saponin in Soapwort and sodium lauryl sulfate in Dreen are doing the identical job: amphiphilic compounds gripping oil with one end and water with the other. The only real difference is that one grows for free in a ditch and the other is manufactured in a chemical plant and sold to you in plastic. Dreen sold extremely well. By the 1940s, roughly half of American households were using a dedicated commercial shampoo. By the 1960s, that number had climbed past 80%. By the 1970s, daily hair washing had become a fully normalized cultural expectation in the United States, reinforced by advertising campaigns built around glamorous hair icons insisting that skipping shampoo for even a few days was practically unhygienic. The underlying message was simple and effective. Modern meant chemical, natural meant outdated. And Soapwort, the plant that had cleaned human beings for free since before the Roman Empire existed, quietly became something people mowed over without a second thought. Except it was not completely abandoned. And the people who never stopped using it are the most fascinating part of this entire story, because it circles right back to where we started, that conservation lab in London. Walk into certain museum textile conservation departments today, in London, in Paris, in specialist workshops scattered across Europe, and you will find professionals doing something a medieval fuller would immediately recognize. They simmer Soapwort roots in water, strain the liquid, and use it to clean fabric. Not ordinary fabric. The most fragile, irreplaceable textiles on the planet. Tapestries woven 500 years ago. Silk vestments from the Renaissance. Lace so delicate it can disintegrate under the wrong touch. Institutions responsible for historic textile collections have used Soapwort to clean their most delicate holdings for decades, and the reasoning is exactly what you would expect once you understand the chemistry. Historic textiles are extraordinarily vulnerable, easily damaged by insects, mold, light, humidity, and above all, the wrong cleaning agent. Even mild modern synthetic detergents can abrade or chemically alter protein-based fibers like silk and wool over time. Alkaline residues can quietly break down molecular bonds in centuries-old fabric. Colors fade, fibers weaken, threads snap, and when the object in front of you was woven in the 1400s, there is no replacement. There is no second attempt. Centuries of irreplaceable history can vanish in a single wash cycle if you choose the wrong product. Soapwort avoids all of that. Its saponins clean gently enough to leave delicate fibers structurally undamaged, and the plant even leaves behind the same subtle luster Tudor-era launderers noticed on lace 400 years ago. Modern materials science backs this up directly. Saponin molecules reduce surface tension and lift dirt efficiently, but interact with natural protein fibers far less aggressively than sodium lauryl sulfate and its synthetic relatives. So think about what that actually means. An entire industry spent a century engineering a synthetic replacement for a molecule nature had already perfected, and in the one setting where getting it wrong is genuinely catastrophic, professionals quietly went right back to the original. And Soapwort never actually left in the wider world either. It is still out there right now, growing wild across nearly every temperate region of the Northern Hemisphere. It lines railroad tracks. It colonizes vacant lots in major cities, its white flowers and faint honeyed scent drawing in moths at dusk. It blooms pink and white along country roads across England, France, and Germany, exactly where it has grown for centuries. The plant typically reaches somewhere between 12 and 36 inches tall, produces clusters of pale flowers from midsummer into fall, and is hardy enough to survive across a wide range of climate zones. It prefers full sun and well-drained soil, but tolerates almost anything. Gerard, 400 years ago, was right. Once it takes root, it does not leave. And a small but growing number of people have started paying attention to it again. Beginning in the 1970s, a movement pushing back against daily commercial shampooing argued that harsh synthetic cleansers strip essential oils from the scalp, prompting the body to overproduce oil in response, which then requires even more frequent shampooing, a cycle that benefits shampoo companies far more than it benefits your hair. That movement never went mainstream, but it planted a seed. And interest in plant-based alternatives to commercial cleaning products has grown steadily ever since. Soapwort sits directly at the center of that conversation. You can grow it yourself, boil the roots for about half an hour, strain the liquid, and use it as a genuinely gentle shampoo. Some people infuse it with rosemary or chamomile for scent, since soapwort on its own is not particularly fragrant. People use it as a face wash for sensitive or acne-prone skin, a rinse for delicate fabrics, or a general household cleaner. The recipes have barely changed since the Middle Ages, because they never needed to. The underlying chemistry already worked. Modern research into plant-derived surfactants continues to confirm that saponins are gentler on skin and hair than many synthetic alternatives, which is part of why a handful of natural cosmetic brands have quietly begun adding soapwort extract back into their formulations. The plant an entire industry worked to erase is slowly being reintroduced by that same industry, decades later, often marketed as an innovation. Before you go plant a garden full of it, it is worth being honest about the plant's downsides too, because soapwort is useful, not harmless. Saponins are toxic in large ingested quantities, capable of causing severe vomiting and diarrhea. The plant is also toxic to fish, so it should never be grown near ponds or waterways. And true to every warning issued about it for 400 years, it spreads aggressively enough to crowd out native plants if left completely unmanaged. This is not a story about a magical, risk-free miracle plant. It is a story about a genuinely effective tool that got discarded for reasons that had almost nothing to do with how well it actually worked. Because here is the real question sitting underneath all of this, and it has very little to do with shampoo. Soapwort did not disappear because it failed. It did not lose to a better product. It lost to a more profitable one. A synthetic molecule could be manufactured at scale, bottled, branded, advertised, and sold for a recurring profit in a way that a free wild plant never could. The economics changed, the marketing changed, and within about 50 years, thousands of years of accumulated human knowledge about a common, freely available plant essentially evaporated from public memory. We did not forget soapwort because it stopped working. We forgot it because somebody figured out how to charge us for a replacement, market that replacement as progress, and get an entire civilization to agree. And that pattern is worth sitting with, because soapwort is almost certainly not the only thing this happened to. Every modern convenience replaced something older, and in more cases than we like to admit, the older version was not nearly as inferior as the marketing for its replacement needed you to believe. The interesting question was never really whether soapwort beats modern shampoo. The interesting question is how many other soapworts are still out there right now, growing quietly on the side of the road, doing exactly what they have always done, waiting for somebody to remember they exist. Its full scientific name, Saponaria officinalis, actually carries one more clue in it that most people scroll straight past. That word officinalis is a specific botanical label. It means the plant was formally recognized by apothecaries, stocked and sold in their shops, and officially considered useful by the medical and commercial establishments of its era. This was never a folk curiosity or an old wives' tale. It was a documented, approved, commercially available product in the original meaning of that phrase. Today, soapwort holds no official status of any kind. In parts of North America, it is formally classified as an invasive weed. Gardening guides actively warn people against planting it. The same plant that cleaned Roman senators, scoured medieval wool, preserved Tudor lace, and is still saving irreplaceable museum textiles from destruction is now, by modern classification, a nuisance to be removed. So the real question is not whether Soapwort deserved to be forgotten. It is how many other things we have already lost without ever noticing they were gone, because nobody profited from reminding us. If this one surprised you, that is exactly the point of this channel, and there is a lot more where it came from. Subscribe now so you do not miss what we dig up next, because the next piece of everyday history we are covering was erased using almost exactly the same playbook, and it is even stranger than this one.